All right, thanks for that. Now, Michael raised a lot of points, and I'm going to address them. But nonetheless, if you really think about all his points, none of his points take away from the points I mentioned. All the points I mentioned, I'm going to ask the same question. Are those points not relevant to a modern society? Those ethical, moral teachings that I brought up. And we know the answer. So those points don't really take away from my points. So I'm still going to stand by the fact that those teachings have a major relevance to our modern society and a major relevance to the problems we face. Now, the first point Michael brought up is the science point. Religion versus science, in a way. You know, religion is really, the religious explanations have been the result of ignorance, and naturalistic scientific explanations are really overtaking theological religious explanations. Now, this is a major straw man that atheists have been using for the past few years, this whole science argument. In a way, atheists are turning religion or science into their own religion. I mean, at the end of the day, theists do not reject the science. We accept many of these scientific naturalistic explanations. I mean, some of the greatest scientists have been theists. Isaac Newton, he was a very religious Christian Unitarian. Some of the greatest scientists were Muslim scientists during the Islamic Golden Age. In fact, it was the religion that motivated them to study our world and to study and find the naturalistic explanations. So science doesn't really hurt our position. And having said that, science doesn't hurt the moral teachings I brought up. Okay, it's good enough you can explain why the sun does what it does, why the earth rotates, why the sea comes in, why there's salt in the sea, all of these things. It's nice you can explain them, but you still have lots of homeless people on the streets, and that doesn't help them. The moral teachings that I brought up help them. So the science doesn't really refute those points I made. And I'll say it again, exactly, we've had such great scientific advancement, and yet children are dying practically every second of a preventable disease. So what have we done with all this great science? Nothing much. And the second point was about morality. And Michael's definition is morality, if we didn't have religion, morality is basically how we treat other people. And so causing unnecessary pain, we know that would be wrong to cause unnecessary pain. Well, I'm afraid history proves otherwise. Many people caused unnecessary pain for their own reasons, and they viewed it as being perfectly legitimate and moral. So that's a very subjective definition to say morality is causing unnecessary harm. There are people who have racist, bigoted views who, if you're a black man, they just want to cause you unnecessary harm just because of the color of your skin. So that thinking does not apply to many people. That's a subjective definition of morality. And you just have to study history to see that for yourself. And the third point was about certain verses in religious books that we have to justify, that we have to explain. And the reason why we explain them is because we're applying our own morality. We basically view that this is a bit difficult to understand. Not really. The main reason why most people often try to explain verses is because other people have misunderstandings about them. So when I explain a verse of the Quran that might be difficult, it's not because I find it difficult, it's because the other person finds it difficult and I'm trying to explain it to him and what it means. And I mean, there's so many things we find difficult to understand where we have to explain it, even outside religion. So that doesn't really count against religion or morality. The fourth point was secularism. Studies are showing that secular societies or more secular-oriented areas are better off than religious areas. Like in America, the northern states are usually better than the southern states, and the northern states are where most of the liberal secularists live, but most of the religion is in the south, the Bible Belt. And you find more problems amongst the religion than the secularists. Now, for me personally, I find it a very weak correlation to say just because those people might be more religious and more problems are with those people, that means that it's because of religion. I can play that game too. In modern history, the biggest mass murderers have been atheists, Stalin and Mao. So now should we also make the correlation that atheism causes the biggest mass murderers? Because that's the logic of the argument. We look at these religious areas, they have more problems than these secular areas. So there's a correlation that we're trying to make that religion somehow leads to these problems. So the biggest mass murderers, the biggest mass murdering regimes in recent history have been atheist ones. Secular ones, in fact, if you want to get technical. Communism is a secularist ideology. So we can make the argument too, on a much bigger scale. But I doubt atheists would accept the argument. And if you're not willing to accept the logic of your own argument, then, there's a weakness. So I believe those were basically the main points he brought. But I want to go back to the main point. The ethical, moral teachings that I brought up. Forget about theology. Forget about whether you believe God exists or not. That's irrelevant. These teachings are there. Teachings on helping the poor people, looking after the poor people, feeding the poor people, not being a racist, not being a bigot. All of these teachings, it doesn't matter if you believe in theology behind it or whatever, these moral teachings are there. And you have to ask yourself, are these teachings not relevant to a modern society? And I think we all know the answer. And in fact, to another point, Michael brought up a point about naturalistic explanations. Now, you can't talk about naturalistic explanations and then separate naturalistic explanations from morality. In other words, you can't have your cake and eat it. If you want to come from a purely materialistic, naturalistic worldview, then you need to apply that to morality as well. Now, in a purely naturalistic worldview, according to the theory of evolution, we evolve over time. This is the official science. Humans, animals have evolved over time. And we adapt. And the whole reason, the whole purpose behind evolution is simply about survival. Getting stronger, getting better over time to increase your chances and likelihood of survival through adaptation to where you live and your surroundings. That's what the theory of evolution is all about. That's the scientific, naturalistic explanation. So now let's apply that to morality. If evolution is all about survival, then I as a human, why should I help a poor person? Why should I help people in Africa? This is another fact as well. Studies are showing that the world is becoming overpopulated. There's 7 billion people. Now, what does shrinking resources and overpopulation lead to? It leads to extinction. Limited resources and an unlimited amount of people using these resources is bad for us. We're going to run out eventually. So in the interest of survival, the naturalistic worldview, we shouldn't help those people. Because if you're helping other people, you're taking away resources that you could use for your own survival, and you're limiting your survival chances by using those resources. That's what a naturalistic worldview actually leads to, if you want to be consistent. It doesn't matter, okay, I want to be good to you. Yeah, I want to be nice with you. But that's going to harm my survival. That's the naturalistic, purely materialistic worldview. It doesn't make any sense for me to have empathy for you. There's no naturalistic explanation. Just ask yourself, I'm going to be kind to you, and that's going to lead to my extinction. But I shouldn't be kind to you, which increases my survival rate, which makes more logical, rational, naturalistic sense to you. We know the answer. And that's what evolution is all about. Evolution doesn't have sympathy, empathy, it has none of that. It's about survival of the fittest. It's about who can survive. And thousands of species have been extinct, as we're often told. And they were extinct because they couldn't adapt, because they were not strong enough. And that's the purely materialistic, naturalistic response to morality. You can't go away from it, you know. It's only through, and I always say this, it's only through a metaphysical basis where helping your fellow man makes sense. Because in a metaphysical worldview, humans have an intrinsic value to them. In fact, an irony, the American forefathers who wrote the Constitution in the Declaration of Independence even said that all men are created equally with unalienable, with rights that we all have, liberty, justice, these are all given to us. So even they believed in that. You see, it's only through the metaphysical explanation where those things make sense. But from a purely naturalistic worldview, it doesn't make sense. From a purely scientific worldview, it doesn't make sense to help a poor man when helping that poor man is going to take away from yourself and limit your chances of survival and your family's chances of survival. You should only look to yourself. And I'll end it with this. In the Gospels, there's a very interesting teaching of Jesus where he commands the people to invite the poor people to their homes. And you know what's the reason he gives? Because they can never pay you back. That's why it's much more special to help somebody who can't help you back. And what's funny is that many atheists say that the reason why we're good to each other is mutual benefit. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. The selfish gene. You know, we just help each other so it can come back in return. But here you have this metaphysical teaching saying, help these poor people, and the reason why it's good is precisely because they can't pay you back. And that only makes sense through a metaphysical worldview, not the naturalistic worldview.